Go outside and touch grass. I know y'all missed the peeling walls that are behind me as a background. Don't worry, that will return. Every time I come back home to visit my family and friends, specifically at my childhood home, I start to realize how good we had it and how much God has blessed us throughout this time. And one of the many things that God has blessed me with is a backyard, is green grass that I took for granted growing up. Living in the city for the past couple of years has made me realize a couple of things. One, living in a city, being separated from nature is actually super unnatural, and that we as humans are much better if we actually expose ourselves to things like grass, to things like sunlight, to things like plants.
But you gotta go outside.
Looking at our species from a bird's eye view, one thing that I find interesting is that the farther we have fallen away from God, the farther we are distancing ourselves from nature itself. A common phrase that has been around that I'm starting to look at a little bit differently is whenever someone refers to a city or some kind of urban setting as a concrete jungle. And if you really think about it, the city is actually supposed to represent nature itself. The skyscrapers and the tall buildings are supposed to represent the trees. If you look at lamps, of course, the sun is always going to be out. The moon is always going to be out. But if you look at all the street lamps, the lights that are always lighting up cities, that's supposed to represent the sun as well. And then, of course, when it comes to food, while yes, we actually have to eat edible food, I'd argue that a lot of the food that you find in the city is more processed, unnatural foods that are made in labs versus the food that is grown from the ground. Speaking on the ground, instead of having grass and dirt to walk on, we instead have created concrete and pavement. Instead of having natural ways of transportation like horses, we have actually created cars, though that's not exclusive to cities. Although, of course, there are plenty more cars and things that exert fossil fuels into our sky instead of horses, which, you know, horses and animals and even humans for that matter also emit gases, but not to the extent of cars. I don't necessarily need to bring up all the negative effects of living in a city, from the pollution in the sky, again, from a lack of sunlight because of said pollution, from the fact that there aren't that many real living trees that can give us oxygen and grass for that matter as well. We don't have to talk about all the health crises that come with living in an urban society. We all know that. I just find it interesting how cities have always been the place that you gotta make it in. You know, the New York cities, the LAs, you know, those kind of cities that say, hey, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. It's as if these cities or whoever's running these cities are trying to draw us away from God's intended purpose of placing us in nature for us to thrive and survive in. It just feels like people in the cities are, you know, more anxious, angrier, not as healthy, of course, because you quite literally are ingesting and breathing in all these toxic chemicals. But yet there are multiple sources that are saying that by 2050, about 70% of the human population will be living in urban societies. Now, of course, while there is plenty of scientific natural evidence that humans exposing themselves to nature is beneficial, there's also biblical evidence as well of God literally saying, hey, go outside. I made these plants and nature specifically for you. Job chapter 12 verses 7 through 10 says, but ask the animals, and they will teach you, or the birds in the sky, and they will tell you, or speak to the earth, and it will teach you, or let the fish in the sea inform you. Which of all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In his hand is the life of every creature and the breath of all mankind. Psalm 65 verses 9 through 13 says, you care for the land and water it. You enrich it abundantly. The streams of God are filled with water to provide the people with grain. For so you have ordained it. You drench its furrows and level its ridges. You soften it with showers and bless its crops. You crown the year with your bounty, and your carts overflow with abundance. The grasslands of the wilderness overflow. The hills are clothed with gladness. The meadows are covered with flocks, and the valleys are mantled with grain. They shout for joy and sing. The final verse that I wanted to bring up today is probably the most important one I bring up, and it's Genesis 1 verses 28. And it's the first command that God gave humanity. And it says, God blessed them, meaning Adam and Eve, and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground." I mention all these verses not just to illustrate how God meticulously created this earth, created nature to accommodate both us and species, but I specifically mentioned the last verse in particular to demonstrate that God ordained us humans to make sure that we maintain nature. Now, of course, he tells us this after he tells us to be fruitful and multiply. I'm gonna get to that in another video, by the way. But not only in our current climate are we distancing ourselves from nature, but we're quite literally adding on to the destruction of this earth. Of course, we know global warming, we know climate change, all that fun stuff. We quite literally are destroying the houses and homes of millions of other species that live on this planet, so much so that now nature is fighting back against us. You all could probably attest to this too, but do you know how many times I've ran into random wild animals, whether it's deer, whether it's these stupid raccoons that are always outside my window in the city? We have created so many different ways to avoid nature that now it seems like nature is coming back to haunt us. I say all this to say, please don't be that 70% that I brought up earlier, because although I know many people that live in the city right now is because of circumstance and quite literally have nowhere else to go, it seems like a lot more people are coming into droves inside the city, unknowingly are separating themselves from God himself. So in whatever way you can, fight back against this unnatural phenomena that is happening right now and come closer to God through nature. In other words, go touch grass right now. Whee! Love y'all.